Hi everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And my first question this week comes to me from Troubleshooter125, who asks two questions. Steve, what in wrestling parlance is a shoot? Never heard that usage before. Two, are you as tired of the overuse of the word awesome as I am? Well, for the second part, I have to confess, I think I am at times guilty of indulging in that sort of overuse myself. I think when I think about it, I say awesome a lot. I say, oh, wow, that was awesome. This is so awesome. I say that, I use that word a lot. I'm guilty of the overuse of it. So maybe I should try to watch that, because now that you mention it, that is a word that we sort of lean on a bit, isn't it? Yeah, but as far as the wrestling thing, a shoot in wrestling parlance is, well, it used to mean like a legitimate fight. If two guys were in the wrestling ring and they stopped cooperating with each other and their cooperative, predetermined pro wrestling match turned into an actual fight, that is a shoot. And the term shoot has come to more generally refer to things that happen on wrestling shows that aren't planned, and it very rarely happens. If you're watching pro wrestling today on TV, like if you're watching a WWE show, your chances of viewing a legitimate shoot are very, very low. Shoots almost never happen. Now, a lot of times they will present things that are meant to look like shoots, but they're not really. They're part of the show. They're just presented in a way that is meant to make you think, oh, maybe that was real, you know. But it almost never is. You can tell the difference between a planned, worked shoot, as it's called, and a legitimate shoot. The opposite of a shoot, by the way, in wrestling parlance is a work. Something that is part of the show, that is pre-planned, that is the result of the two guys cooperating with each other. That's called a work. In wrestling parlance, they don't refer to wrestling as fake. They refer to it as a work. Here's one from the Felt Begone. What would the social implications be if humans changed from male to female or female to male every 7 years? That would create some new problems, but wouldn't it solve so many of our current problems? It's really amazing when you think how so many of our social problems, especially like our problems with sexism and gender inequality, how closely tied it is to how rigid our gender roles are. And you know, one of the most enlightening things for me when I went to college and I took biology classes was learning just how much of our gender roles and our sexuality in modern society, in human society, all down the ages, hinges on such random little genetic circumstances, you know? I mean, our whole traditional gender role of, you know, well, women are the ones who stay home and take care of the kids and cook the food and you know, keep the house. That all is derived from the fact that women are the ones who have the children. You know, women get pregnant and they can't go out and hunt with the men, so they stay home with the women. And just imagine if there was a slight bend in our evolution and it turned out that instead of women, men were the ones who had to keep the children, who were incapacitated by pregnancy or whatever. I mean, just think of how different everything would be if somehow in the evolution of mammals that had changed, just that one thing. It's really extraordinary to think about. Or think about how close we all came to being born the opposite sex. I mean, it's a random genetic thing that happens when your parents' DNA is mixed together and you are either a male or a female. It's really astonishing how tenuous our positions are. And it's a reminder to me, and this is what I thought when I first learned these things in school, to not get cocky. To not think that because you're a male, you've got it all going on, and you know, the society is just the way it's supposed to be, and you're in some superior position because you're a dude and you're not a girl. Don't get cocky, because it is built on such flimsy circumstances. Firefly 4F4. I've got to start coming up with questions that aren't film related, but that won't be this time. Can you name some films which are critically or popularly acclaimed that you absolutely hate, and some films you love that are critically or popularly despised? You can leave Superman Returns off the later list for obvious reasons. Thinking of critically acclaimed or popular films that I don't like is relatively easy. There's always the Lord of the Rings movies. I think they're horrendously overrated. I just don't get the appeal of those at all. There's also a movie that was very popular and very critically acclaimed and actually won Best Picture at the Oscars, I think 16 or 17 years ago, and that film is The English Patient. I mean, I remember, it's been a long time since I saw it. Maybe if I watched it again now, I would see things in it that I didn't see when I watched it back in the day, but I remember watching it within a year or so after it came out, and just thinking, yeah, you know, I mean, I can't say I hate it. I didn't think it was horrible, but it was just like, whatever, you know, okay. But as for films that I like or love that are generally despised, other than Superman Returns, which is the obvious choice for me, speaking of superhero movies, there's also Ang Lee's Hulk, which is probably easily the most widely rejected or despised of the Marvel movies. So bad, thought to be so bad by most people that they actually had to pretty much erase it from the franchise and reboot it with another Hulk movie. And I think it's the best of the Marvel movies. I love Ang Lee's Hulk. I think it is absolutely splendid. I love everything about it. I think it's lyrical and beautiful and just a wonderful, wonderful movie. So that's a big one. And also, there's another movie that someone else left a comment and asked me about, which is Prometheus. Here for years asked what I thought of the film Prometheus. And I liked Prometheus a lot. I really don't get the hatred for Prometheus on the internet. I mean, did I think it was like a great movie? Did I think it was as good as Alien or like some, classic science fiction film? No, I didn't think it was at that level, but I really thought it was clever. I really enjoyed it, and I thought Michael Fassbender was great. I thought the performances were all great. Yeah, there are plot holes. Yeah, you can sit there and pick apart and say, why does this happen, and this doesn't make sense, and this doesn't make sense. But as I was watching it, I was carried along by it. I was very impressed by the direction, by the art direction, by the music, by the tone, by the feel of it. I just thought it was tremendous, and I am definitely in the minority on that. Prometheus is probably more despised on the internet at this moment than Superman Returns. Maybe even more, although this is a tough call, maybe even more than the last Indiana Jones movie, which I also didn't think was nearly as bad as most people on the internet thought it was. Not a great movie, certainly not in the same caliber as Raiders of the Lost Ark, absolutely not. But not a terrible movie. I mean, certainly not the sort of thing, not the raping of a beloved icon like they hyperbolically portrayed it on South Park. Certainly not that bad. So yeah, there's a few. Sepia Siren, question, did you like Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette? I found Sophia's fingerprint throughout and I didn't like it. I think her style creates a bit of drag and lethargy as she overemphasizes the emotional aspects. I mean, do I really need to see two characters staring blankly at a TV screen for 5 minutes to get that they are jaded and disconnected? I felt this with the Marie Antoinette carriage scene. She also seems to put down the poor and uneducated with mockery. I agree with you. I didn't think it was that great of a movie. And I remember being very predisposed to like it before I saw it. Because, as I mentioned before, I love Sofia Coppola's previous film to Marie Antoinette, Lost in Translation. It's one of my very favorite films. I just think it's a wonderful movie. And her first film, The Virgin Suicides, I thought was pretty good too. So I was ready to like it. And I mean, I'm always happy to see Kirsten Dunst in something for a variety of reasons. And I just didn't think it was that great of a movie, Marie Antoinette. I agree with you. I think it does play a little slow, a little lethargic. It takes a little too long to get where it's going. But my main problem with it was I felt like there was a disconnect between how the characters, how the movie intended to present the characters, how the movie saw the characters, and how they came across to me as the viewer. Obviously, Sofia Coppola wants to present Marie Antoinette and the nobility in general that are deposed and attacked by the French Revolution. It wants to present them in a sympathetic light without ignoring their problems and ignoring their crimes and etc., but wants to show them as sympathetic people. But I don't think that comes across in the film. I remember watching it and getting to the end of it and feeling cheated that we didn't get to see the beheading, because I wanted to see these people executed. I thought that the film had not redeemed them, had not shown them to be, you know, sympathetic human beings with frailties and faults who had made poor choices, but human beings nonetheless. I thought they were horrible people. Just within the context of the film, not even judging from like my knowledge of history and my own preconceptions about the French Revolution and the different factions at play there, just judging purely by the film, I thought they were just horrible people and that they deserved everything they got. And I felt so cheated that the end of the film came before we saw them get beheaded. And I particularly remember thinking when at the end when they were fleeing the palace, and there's that scene where Marie and her husband, the king, are being taken away from the palace in a cart, and Marie is sort of looking back at her home where she's just had to flee, and it's played as like a sad, tragic moment. And I didn't find it tragic at all watching the movie. I thought, well, that's what you get. You horrible people. You deserve everything that is happening to you. And that's not how I was supposed to feel. That's not how Sofia Coppola, as the filmmaker, wanted me to feel. I think she wanted me to be with Marie. And I wasn't. I wasn't at all. It didn't get me the way it was supposed to get me. And that, to me, is the biggest problem with that film. And it's a major problem with any film where that happens. Savoy 1984. Who would you credit with the invention of the television? The first name I always heard, and I guess the first name that you still usually hear about the invention of the television, is Philo Farnsworth. Philo T. Farnsworth, I think, and he invented, I don't even remember off the top of my head what the device was, but he got the patent for one of the key devices of electronic television. So he's sort of usually credited as the inventor. But I remember watching Ken Burns' really excellent documentary, Empire of the Air, about the history of radio. And it talks about how at RCA, David Sarnoff, who was the general manager of RCA, basically locked a whole bunch of scientists in a room. I mean, not a room, it was a couple floors of the RCA building, but essentially he locked a bunch of scientists in a room and gave them all the money they needed and just sort of told them, invent television. And, you know, years and years and years of work and billions of dollars later, they did. And I remember thinking, that is so amazing. One of the great technological breakthroughs, one of the great communications and entertainment mediums of all human culture, was basically created as a sheer act of will. A guy with the money and the resources to do it got the people with the brains to do it together and said, here's what I want you to do. Here's everything you should need to do it. Do it. And they did it. And obviously that's a really simplified version of what actually happened. There were a lot of different people, a lot of different inventions that were put together to form what we now think of as a single thing, television. But that idea, that story presented in Empire of the Air of David Sarnoff, just sort of locking the smart people in the room and saying, okay, we want you to invent TV, so invent TV. Is such a wonderful idea to me. So I would sort of credit David Sarnoff with it as well. Even though he didn't actually do any of the inventing or the building himself, he wasn't one of the engineers that did it, but he was the visionary and he was the manager, the mogul, if you will, who had the determination and the commitment to see that it got done. Octa Medicine. Steve, do you think art is objectively good or bad, or is it all subjective? I don't believe there is a universal set of rules for what is good, bad, but I do think certain art produces more stupidity in society, and judged from that criteria, it qualifies as bad. Would you agree? This would be all arts, books, movies, etc. I do think that it is all subjective. I think whether you believe that a certain piece of art is good or bad depends on your taste, on your personal opinion, on what you get from it or what you don't get from it, etc. I think it's completely subjective. There's no such thing as an objectively good or an objectively bad piece of art. And I think the closest we can come to those sorts of standards, and it's a lot like when we think about making moral judgments. When we make judgments about art, it's the same as when we're making a moral judgment. The closest we can come to absolute objective standards is reaching points of consensus among many people trying to make the same judgment. And in that sense, what you're talking about, how certain art produces stupidity in society and therefore should be judged to be bad for that reason, that is sort of a point of consensus among a lot of people, among a lot of critics, among a lot of audience members. Low intellect in art, art that panders to the lowest common denominator, that appeals to our baser instincts, that appeals to the less desirable elements of our humanity, that riles us up in sort of base ways. That is thought by many people to be a negative thing, and art that does that or relies on that sort of thing is judged to be bad. But even that is based on a subjective judgment that these things are bad. So ultimately it is all subjective, but we can reach consensus, and there are certain points of consensus, not universal but very broad consensus. Like take film, for instance, because that's the area where I'm most fluent. It's not universally thought that Citizen Kane is, if not the greatest, one of the greatest films ever made. Everybody doesn't think that. There are some people who don't think that. There are even a few people who would take the opposite view and would be contrarian and would say that Citizen Kane actually isn't that great of a movie. But for the most part, the overwhelming consensus among critics and film people is that Citizen Kane is a masterpiece and it's one of the great films ever made. Ditto for The Godfather, or Seven Samurai, or the original Nosferatu, or The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, or some film that is thought of as a monumental piece of work and a great piece of art. There's very close to common consensus or universal consensus about these things, but it's ultimately all about personal opinion. When you have a consensus over a great piece of art, it just means that a lot of people like it. It doesn't mean that it's objectively good or bad. Hypatia Huxley, there is a lot to be frustrated and upset about in the news. What kinds of things cheer you up and make you optimistic about the future? Well, there are personal things, experiences I have with my family or my friends, but a lot of it is also to make me optimistic about the future, just in a broad sense, our common future. A lot of it is the sort of stuff that I talk about in my And Now the Good News series every week. And most of it is sort of science-related news. It's encouraging things. It's some of it is technological advances, possible new treatments for cancer or AIDS or malaria or some horrible affliction that we might someday be able to conquer because of this new development or new technology, something like that. Or astronomical discoveries, new Hubble Space Telescope pictures, or the story I talked about in this week's Good News video about the cloud map of the exoplanet that is 1,000 light years from our solar system. Things like that just really make me feel good and optimistic about today and about tomorrow. And sometimes people will leave comments on those videos and ask, like, well, how does this qualify as good news? How is it good news for me that we took a picture of a planet 1,000 light years away? How does that change my life? And I mean, it doesn't change your life, practically speaking. You still have to pay your bills. You still have to get up in the morning. You still have to do everything that you don't want to do. But the reason I consider it good news is because when I see something like that, when I read about a new discovery, when I read about some fantastic new thing we've learned about the universe, even if it's a somewhat sort of arcane piece of science that might not have an obvious direct impact on our everyday lives, it evokes my sense of wonder, and it fires my imagination, and it makes me aware of how much we have learned compared to a relatively short time ago. and how much more we have to learn and how much more we are likely to learn just within my own short lifetime that I have left. And it's wonderful, you know, and it does make me optimistic, and it does cheer me up if I'm in kind of a bad mood, or if I'm pissed off about the government being shut down, or, you know, some other, you know, piece of depressing or frustrating news. It really helps. It makes me feel optimistic. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel hopeful. And that's why it's good news, and that's why it's in my good news show. And it's that sort of news. It's that sort of thing that makes me feel good. It makes me feel positive. It makes me feel like looking forward, and like things might be good down the road. It might be better. It might be exciting and interesting and worth seeing and worth living. But of course, I mean, the thing that really gives my life meaning, as you may have guessed, you know, from watching this, is answering rapid fire questions and
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
Or maybe not so rapid fire. Let's just see how it goes. Jim Smith, hey Steve, sorry if you have mentioned this before, but what are you planning to cover in An Atheist Reads after pseudo-philosophy that demands a bitch slap? I would personally like to see you do Timothy Keller's The Reason for God. Also, do you watch What Are Your Thoughts on Potholer 54? I think Timothy Keller's The Reason for God is on my list for next year. I'm definitely doing N.T. Wright's Simply Christian, and I'm doing Ray Comfort's You Can Lead an Atheist to Evidence, but You Can't Make Him Think. And I'm pretty sure the third one in there, probably the middle one between those two, is going to be Timothy Keller's The Reason for God. So, and Potholer 54, I've watched some of his stuff. I think he's pretty good. David Landon, a supervillain has you strapped to a chair and eyes pried open, a la Clockwork Orange, forcing you to watch the most horrible movie over and over until you break. That movie is... Well, it's not the worst movie I've ever seen, but it is the movie that would probably be most effective in breaking me, and that is the recent big-budget musical version of Les Miserables with Hugh Jackman and Anne Hathaway, etc. I thought that was the most unbearably, brutally stupid thing I've ever seen. Bassbait, what do you think is more pathetic? Fighting a cat or losing a fight to a cat? More pathetic is fighting a cat, because anyone who picks like a legit fight with a cat deserves to have their ass kicked, preferably by a cat. Ragdoll Ralph, I guess this goes for the lightning round. Do you like Steve McQueen's movies, Shame, Hunger, and now 12 Years a Slave? Lovely or a bit too slow and artsy? Steve McQueen being the current filmmaker, the current director, not the great star of Days Gone By and Bullet and etc. Yeah, I've only sadly seen Shame. I haven't seen Hunger or 12 Years a Slave. But on the basis of Shame, I would say I really, really like his movies, because I thought Shame was amazing. I thought it was a wonderful film. Very well directed, well written, well acted. Michael Fassbender is just terrific in it. So on that basis alone, I would say lovely, not a bit too slow and artsy. FlippyMaster02, what are your limits as far as weird questions go? For example, if someone asked you something like, would you rather have sex with Penn or Teller, would you answer? If so, would you rather have sex with Penn or Teller? Yeah, I would answer, and I would rather have sex... I think I'd probably rather do Teller. I get the feeling Penn would just talk during the whole thing. And that shit gets old. Special Buzz Juice. Steve, what is your favorite era of wrestling? Mine, personally, was the WWF in the 80s, give or take the era of WrestleManias 3 through 7. And are you a WWF or an NWA WCW fan? My era, if I had to pick one particular era, it would probably be from about WrestleManias 6 to WrestleMania 8 or 9. From when I was age 10 to about 13. That was my first really strong sort of period of wrestling fandom, when I was really, really into it and watching it all the time and really following it and really preoccupied with it. So it would be that era. And if I had to pick between WWF and WCW, I would pick WWF, but I was always a fan of both. I really enjoyed both products and enjoyed the differences between them, and I still do today. Although obviously they ain't making new WCW anymore. Alan Moy, does the universe have a purpose? No, only the purposes that we give it ourselves. That guy 11011. Do you think Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone gunman? Yes. Bagser1. Hey Steve, 2 questions for you this week. Is there a particular film genre that you never really warmed to? And was Dusty Rhodes the inspiration for Toby Benson's voice? Well, the film genre I've never really warmed to still is musicals. There are very few musicals that I like. I just don't think musicals at all. And Dusty Rhodes was not the inspiration for Toby Benson's voice. I was actually trying to do more of a stereotypical pimp voice when I first gave Toby Benson that voice. But Dusty has definitely creeped in since, especially in Toby's cadence. And his idiom a little bit too, because he calls people baby a lot. And that's kind of a Dusty Rhodes thing. Or at least I got that from Dusty Rhodes, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, Dusty's in there a little bit. Sketch Turner, as part of your An Atheist Reads series, would you ever consider doing An Atheist Reads the Bible? I wouldn't say I absolutely never would do it, but I have no real impulse to do it at the moment, just because there are so many other people on YouTube doing similar things and doing just a fine job of it. I mean, I mentioned previously Bob Smearfax's Bob's Notes series, where he looks at the Gospel of Matthew and goes through it one chapter at a time and illustrates it and summarizes it and satirizes it in a really funny way. I really don't see how I could improve on that. I think anything I would do would be redundant. And I got a private message this past week from someone, a fellow YouTuber, who is planning to do an Atheist Reads the Bible series. So I mean, it feels like that ground is covered for now. It doesn't mean I would never ever do it. But for now, I think I'm probably going to stick with An Atheist Reads works of apologetics. I think that's probably more where my my talents, such as they are of use. So that's it for the questions. Before I get out of here this week, as always, I want to give a shout out. And the shout out this week goes to God Must Die, which is the atheist channel of my pal Mat Broomfield, one of my very favorite people that I've met from doing this YouTube stuff. Matt has a primary channel that he uses mostly to make videos talking about skateboarding. But then he also has this channel, God Must Die, YouTube username Theists Can Go to Hell, where he talks about atheism and religion and God-related stuff. And it's a really good channel. And I feel like his voice is one, in my own judgment, that deserves to be heard more. And I want you to check out Matt's channel, watch his videos, and see if it's your type of thing, and see if you can show him some love and show him some attention and give him a subscription, because I really think he deserves to be seen by a wider audience. His whole philosophy, his whole way of approaching things is grounded in compassion and respect for people and the desire to have everyone's rights respected and have everybody be able to be treated with kindness and decency. He's just a very compassionate, decent guy, and I really admire that about you, Matt. And I'm very happy to give you a shout out for this channel. I actually just noticed that you had a God Must Die channel relatively recently, which I'm a little embarrassed about that I didn't see it before. But I watched some of the stuff, and it's terrific. And I think you guys should check it out too. Give it a look and see if it's your cup of tea, because Matt's a good guy and he deserves to have his voice heard. So that's it for the shout out. That's it for this week. I will be back to do this again next week, provided of course that you guys ask me some questions that I can answer, because in order for me to do this, you have to ask. So leave a comment on this video. Ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of them as I possibly can next week. And until then, take care. Have a good one. I'll see you next week.